London Property, home of Super Prime, where you can find informative, educational and entertaining content covering all aspects of property.
Hello and welcome to the London Property Podcast. I'm your host Farnaz Fazaipour, and today we're in conversation with the co-founders of TalksforTeens, Merin and Tanaz, who we are excited to say are going to be sharing their insight with us every weekend on our London Property socials. Welcome Merin, welcome Tanaz. Please tell us, what is TalksforTeens?
Thank you very much for having me. We're very thrilled to be here today and talk about TalksforTeens. TalksforTeens was founded 9 months ago now by Tanaz and myself, and it's a digital information platform for busy, forward-thinking teens. What we really want to do with TalksforTeens is to deliver very short, to the point, unbiased information about non-curricular topics for teenagers, because currently we are the only ones doing that. So that is that's the whole raison d'être for TalksforTeens.
Let me ask you, why is TalksforTeens relevant, and why should our listeners be listening to this platform? You know, what was the passion behind it?
That's a very good question, because I think both of us for a long time have been frustrated with the fact that the school curriculum in the UK hasn't changed for 50 years. And although a lot of education in the UK is good, some is really good, a lot of the things that you are taught in schools are really not in lockstep with what's happening outside schools. So what TalksforTeens is trying to do or aiming to do and doing, is providing this information, which is a bridge between school, the curriculum of school, and what's happening in the real world. Because teens today, for example, are not taught in school at all about finance or investing, not really about entrepreneurship, although some schools make noise about it. Don't know, if you study economics, even at A level, you are not taught about cryptocurrencies, what is the metaverse, and all these things are actually, when you are not at school and you're reading the newspaper, if you're reading the newspaper or on social media, or you hear people talking about these things, TalksforTeens is really filling that gap. And this is one of the reasons we think our topics are incredibly relevant to teenagers today, first of all. And second of all, because we know that teenagers are not so fond of reading, we are presenting it in a format that's quite short. So we have very short blogs, which are 500 to 600 words. So it's about literally maximum 3-minute read. And then recently we started introducing podcasts, which are maximum 10 minutes. And we call them our Uber podcasts. So you can go in an Uber, the average Uber journey is probably about 10, 15 minutes. You can just really listen to a nice podcast, a TalksforTeens podcast in your Uber. So that is we really sort of constantly think about teenagers, what they might want to know, what they do want to know. They feed us this information as well. We're obviously mothers of teenagers, and we know tons of teenagers. So they tell us what they don't learn at school, what they do want to know, how long things should be. And literally the Uber podcast came from teens saying, I would listen to it if I were in an Uber, but not otherwise. And the other thing which we have started doing, which was feedback from someone really, really clever, said, why don't you do a voice over all your blogs? And so basically, if you don't want to read our blogs, you can listen to them.
So obviously the fact that you are sourcing this information from what's actually going on in the real world and the feedback that you're getting from your teenagers, you're also able to create this environment for them to go to your platform and get safe sources of information. So tell me a bit more about that.
Well, the first important thing to sort of state is that the people, our writers, our team of writers, are all very, very young. So they are all sort of early 20s. And when we have our meetings with them, we always talk about that they need to write as if they are explaining the subject to a younger sibling. So they need to be very sort of clear, it needs to be plain English, no jargon or anything. And the other very important thing is, and then that goes a little bit back to the why we founded it. So if your child is interested in a certain topic and might be so, forward to go online and start searching about, maybe about the metaverse, let's use that as an example. Then obviously, looking at that subject, you can go into anything. You can read anything, and you can get into websites which we as parents might not find so savory. Your data will be harvested by websites that we don't know. So it's also not always the best way to do it. So what we do with Talks for Teens, and then I come back to your sources, is that we say, okay, we bring this information to you as a first step, and this information that we bring you in this short format, we use only reputable sources. So what we deem reputable is that it's not a website. We verify the information. Obviously, we double check if there are statistics mentioned, anything. We double check. And our sources are normally, we try to use very sort of undisputed sources like The Economist, New York Times, Reuters, Bloomberg Magazine for Finance. We signed the New Scientist, Harvard Journal. So we come from a good range. So when our writers produce blogs and we edit them, we really sort of double check also their sources and always point them towards sources, saying, okay, check this with The Economist or Harvard Journal. Harvard Review wrote something about it. Just look at that. So we want our teens to read it there and not on TikTok or social media, because very often the sources are unverified, as we know, and there's a lot of misinformation. So we try to also really there be very, very unbiased, apolitical, and very clean.
Going back to the fact that, you know, you have your finger on the pulse and you're mothers of teenagers, you're surrounded by a lot of teenagers. What is the sort of unique selling point in how you're choosing these topics and what topics you cover? Farnaz, maybe you can tell us about that.
So we believe we have a good understanding of today's super busy, forward-thinking teens who don't have a lot of time. And we look at topics that we think are part of their world and they're interested in. So we have, for example, should you invest in land in the metaverse? Well, you can read about that in our finance section. We have topics such as, what's better, to be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond? Do you suffer from FOMO? What about flexing? Do you have a friend who flexes, who really irritates you? We'll find out why they shouldn't. And why should you listen to music, do sports, art, things like that, even read? Because you are able to recondition your brain in your teens. So you can find out about this and a lot more on Talks for Teens.
Sounds to me like you're going to need a dictionary of teen lingo soon as well, right? Because they keep saying things that we don't understand.
Flexing, no, we didn't
know
what flexing
was.
was.
Mum? And I'm like, what am I meant to do? Is something going in a cup? And various other bits of information.
If I may just add to that, because I think what is other than that, which is also quite important, if you are, what we mentioned a little bit in the beginning, if you are, for example, a sixth form economics, you do A-level economics. So you want to know, it actually then Talks for Teens is very helpful if you go into, want to know about the jargon of inflation and productivity, dependency ratios. And it's just explained in a very simple way. And it will give you some ammunition. I think that's a little bit also the word we use a lot between ourselves. It's tooling up teens. So we want to give teens tools in their hands that you don't feel that you go somewhere and say, oh, what is it? And very often when you're 16, 17, you don't dare to ask anymore. I don't know why people do. We wrote a blog about that as well, why people don't ask. Please learn to ask, which is important. But you will be surprised how many teens do not ask, and hence we hope we can be their secret weapon.
And I might just flex for a minute, because I used to work on a programme called First Edition, which was Channel 4 News' children's news programme. And actually a lot of what we made there was listened to or accessed by adults, because we put it in such a simple way in topics which you hear about all the time. You might not understand the ins and outs, but if you listen to something that's written for children in a very accessible, clear way, it's beneficial to all.
Coming back to what you were saying about working for a news channel before, what valuable traits from that job are now helping you in what you're doing here with Talks for Teens?
I think the key message is to not tell people what to think, but give them the tools to think for themselves.
As a parent, how would you recommend that somebody uses this site?
So as a parent, I pick up a lot of cues from my children and from their friends when I see them and how they interact with social media, TikTok, Instagram, with each other, what they engage with. I can pick up cues and I can intuitively feel what they want to hear or see or listen to. And so, for example, one of the latest blogs we wrote was about economics and COVID, because they hear all these terms all the time, but they can't really place them. And they don't really understand how inflation is affected by COVID, for example, or how government intervention has caused various changes in the economy. So we try and explain those things to them in a very accessible way.
So actually, as a tip to other parents who might be listening to us today, is they could actually put in requests to you as what they would like to.
Oh yes, please.
Yes, right.
Yes,
and leading their children into becoming aware of the site. So things like so the hot topics at the moment, we've touched on some of them: the metaverse, and I guess cryptocurrencies and NFTs. I probably need to go read those because I don't really understand any of them at the moment. I don't know why anybody would be buying square footage in metaverse when they could be buying it in Knightsbridge. But can you tell us more about these kind of hot topics that you've got going at the moment?
well, I think you touched well on the metaverse, because the metaverse is actually a very, very big deal, and you can see that we're writing quite a bit about it. We've read about the incredible economy of the metaverse. Part of this economy is buying real estate. Who would have thought you would buy real estate? You would buy a small parcel of land in the metaverse. But as you would have seen that if you've read a blog, the prices have gone from just under $3,000 in March 2021 to almost $20,000 for a plot, and still compared to Knightsbridge, it's nothing. But I know a lot of teens, a little bit older teens, who are incredibly into crypto and metaverse, and are actually very good in trading, buying NFTs. I still don't really know myself how to buy an NFT. I'm very interested in it, but so you have these platforms where you can do it, obviously, but you first need to, and this is what a lot of teens ask us, because obviously a lot of parents say, crypto, stay away, but teens ask us, where do I start? And obviously, if you have cryptos, you can start with, which is quite exciting. You can start with £5 or £10 and have a small account, and then you see that it goes to 10. You invest £5 and it goes to £10, and for a teen, a young teen, that is very exciting. So I think for the boy teens that we know, cryptocurrencies and the metaverse are a big, big subject, like esports. We write a lot about esports as well. And another thing which I think is very actual, and a lot of people think about fashion, this is very curly things, but fashion obviously is one of the biggest industries in the world. And we write always about the business of fashion, because we know a lot of girls, and I'm sorry to be a little bit gender typical, but a lot of girls like fashion, but not fashion per se, but the business of fashion. And it's all about sustainability. They're incredible. It's incredible scientific. There are a lot of scientific breakthroughs in the fashion sustainability supply chains. So these are topics that we get fed back a lot, and dealing with social media.
So we have a very big section called Toolbox, and that gives a lot of tools for teenagers and young people in general of how to spend their free time. What should they do? Why is fresh air good for them, for example? Or if they're revising, what are the best ways to revise? So in there, we try and give practical skills to teenagers that they can just read in 2 minutes and hopefully improve their outcomes.
The other thing that I thought was very interesting about what Talks for Teens do is that you actually, and this is going back to the competitive London parent here, so you actually have teenage bloggers. Mm-hmm. And I hate to say it, but actually, on a child's CV, if they've been teenage blogging before they get to their university, is actually a really insightful thing to do. But tell me about how that works, the teenage blogging, and what sort of topics do they choose their topics? Do you tell them what to write? How does that work?
Teenagers tend to choose their topics. So they will come to us and they'll say, I'd like to write about, for example, skateboarding, or I'd like to write about something to do with fashion, whatever interests them. The teenager will choose their own topic typically, and they'll come to us, they'll write it, and we will give them a few guidelines to stick within our editorial policy, but we don't edit them. We only correct any corrections which we need to correct. But otherwise, they're unedited and very relaxed in style. And a teen blogger will get a special stamp that says teen blogger on their blog, and they'll also get recognition on social media with their name. Okay, so they get editorial recognition.
The other thing that I think is really interesting from what you do on Talks for Teens is the sort of diary style blogging, where someone's gone on a gap year, for example, and then they share their experience that might inspire the next person into what they should do. So is that, can you tell us a bit more about those type of diary?
The one thing which we do currently with the gap year is that we have started already. The first one will arrive tomorrow, Friday the 14th. We do a podcast series actually about students who are in a gap year or thinking or have done a gap year. And I must say, it's amazing to listen to it, because I always think that my children need to take a gap year after this, because the things that people learn during this gap years is quite astonishing. So we will carry on a thread. It was a little bit on hold because of COVID, but we will certainly revive that section.
Yes, well, I have to say, one of my biggest regrets in life is not taking a gap year, because the next time you can do that, you're probably, in your 70s and not a really good backpacker. So highly recommend gap years to everybody. So what's next for Talks for Teens?
If I may add one thing in between to what's next, is that quite a few people say to us, oh, but teens don't read. And so why are you doing this? Because teens don't read. And although there's a little bit of a consensus view, our numbers actually show the opposite. So it is a little bit a $1 million question, but teens do read, and our readership is actually doubling every month. So we do have teens on it, because we know they're teenagers. So there is some traction, and I think maybe, thank goodness, it's short enough for teens to like it. What's next for us is that. And maybe you have to add something to that. What's next for us is currently we are completely self-funded. We have no advertising for reasons that we discussed. But we have a very exciting series of webinars and lectures lined up, which will start launching in the summer term of this year. And those will be for a fee. So that's what's next. So we will go slightly offline, online, but our webinars are going to be in a completely new format, which is going to be very exciting.
Well, watch this space.
Watch this space. Yes.
Let's hear from you, Tana, as to what next for Talks for Teens.
So we also want to start a sort of chat room where we have parents of teenagers can share their ideas, questions, and get to know more about topics related to teens, specific to teens, which is actually very different to younger children and obviously different to adults. And teens are a very specific set of children.
So this is for parents to be able to support each other and get ideas from each other?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think it's all very exciting, and I certainly will be educating myself on some of these subjects. And as I said, we're very, very pleased to be giving our weekend spot. It's been fascinating talking to you both, and obviously we're a big fan of Talks for Teens, and very pleased to be sharing some of your insight at the weekend for our listeners, and hopefully next time we'll meet in the metaverse.
We may very well meet in the metaverse and look at some property together, and maybe at a new school building in the metaverse. It will be very exciting. Thank you so much for having us.
Pleasure. It was great having you in our studio. Thank you to our listeners, and don't forget to tune in every Saturday across all our socials to get the latest from Talks for Teens.
Thanks for listening to the London Property Podcast. Head over to londonproperty.co.uk and subscribe to our newsletter to receive latest updates.